What if everything you've been doing to save money on gas was wrong? Not slightly wrong, completely, fundamentally, embarrassingly wrong. Because right now, today, there is a tablet. A small, simple, palm-sized tablet that you can make at home for about $1, maybe less. And when you drop it into your gas tank before you fill up, something happens inside your engine that the fuel industry has spent decades pretending isn't real. Your mileage goes up. Not by a little. Not by the 2 posh you get from premium fuel. Not by the 4 cent some guy on the internet promised you from a magnetic clip he sold for $80. We're talking about gains that make fuel engineers go quiet. Gains that have been documented, replicated, buried, and rediscovered over and over again for nearly a century. And the craziest part? You've never heard of it. Not from your mechanic, not from the car company, not from the government fuel economy ratings that get updated every single year. Nobody told you. And after the next 20 minutes, you're going to understand exactly why. Let's start with what you've probably already tried. You've seen the fuel additives at the auto parts store. Little bottles, maybe $12, maybe $25 each. They promise better combustion, cleaner injectors, more power. And maybe you noticed a slight improvement. Maybe you didn't. But even in the best case, we're talking about marginal gains. The kind of improvement that gets lost in the noise of traffic, temperature changes, and the way you accelerate off a stoplight. Then there's ECU tuning. You can remap your engine's brain, change the fuel injection timing, the air-fuel ratio, squeeze out more efficiency from the combustion cycle. Legitimate technology. Real results. But you're looking at hundreds of dollars, sometimes thousands, and you need a specialist who knows what they're doing, or you risk damaging the engine you're trying to save. Gas rewards programs, the loyalty points, the app discounts, the credit card cash back on fuel? Sure, keep using them, but you're fighting over pennies while the meter keeps running. Here's the uncomfortable reality. The entire conversation around fuel savings has been deliberately narrowed. It's been herded into a small, manageable pen where the solutions are either expensive, marginal, or conveniently tied to purchasing something new. Nobody handed you a $1 answer. Until now. I want you to think about a man. Let's call him a chemist, because that's what he was. Working in the late 1930s, in a period when the internal combustion engine was still young enough that engineers genuinely believed they hadn't figured it all out yet. There was still a sense of open possibility. Still a belief that fundamental improvements were waiting to be found. This chemist wasn't working for an oil company. He was working in an academic setting, studying something that had nothing to do with engines at the start. He was studying surface chemistry, the way molecules behave at boundaries, at the edge between one substance and another. And one day, running a series of experiments that had nothing to do with fuel, he noticed something. When he added a specific type of compound to a hydrocarbon liquid, something in the same chemical family as gasoline, the liquid behaved differently when it was forced through a small nozzle. The droplets it formed were smaller, much smaller, more numerous, more evenly distributed in the air. He wrote it up, published it in a journal that almost nobody outside of industrial chemistry would ever read. And then he moved on to other things. For a while, his finding just sat there, quietly, on a shelf in the archived stacks of a university library somewhere in the northeastern United States. But other people found it. Engineers, mostly. People who were working on combustion efficiency during the Second World War, when fuel was rationed and every mile per gallon mattered, not just economically, but strategically, militarily. When you needed to move more machinery further on, less fuel, suddenly the chemistry of droplet formation looked very, very interesting. The results of what they tested were remarkable. And then the war ended. The economy boomed, fuel was cheap, cars were big, and nobody, least of all the companies selling gasoline at scale, wanted to talk about how to use dramatically less of it. The research didn't get destroyed, it just got quiet. And quiet, in the world of suppressed knowledge, is often more effective than loud. Before we go any further, I need you to understand something about how your engine actually works. Because most people have a picture in their head that's completely wrong. And that wrong picture is exactly why this discovery sounds impossible at first. When you fill your tank with gasoline, you're not filling it with something that burns, not directly. Liquid gasoline doesn't really burn. What burns is the vapor, the gas that evaporates off the surface of the liquid, the fumes. The invisible cloud of hydrocarbon molecules floating in the air above a puddle of fuel. Your engine knows this. It's designed around this. The entire fuel injection system, the carburetor in older engines, it's all built to take that liquid fuel and turn it into something that can actually ignite. It sprays the fuel into the intake as a mist, tiny droplets suspended in rushing air, forming a mixture that can be compressed and ignited to produce power. But here's the thing that nobody puts in the car commercial. Not all of it burns. The droplets that come out of your fuel injectors, they're not the same size. Some are fine, tiny, well-suited for vaporization. Others are larger, coarser, and they don't have time to fully vaporize before the compression and ignition happen. Those larger droplets get pushed through the combustion process partially unburned. They end up in your exhaust. Black smoke. Unburned hydrocarbons. The chemical signature of wasted fuel. On a well-tuned modern engine, combustion efficiency might reach somewhere between 75% and 85% under optimal conditions. You are literally paying for 15 to 25% of the fuel in your tank that your engine never fully uses. Let that sit for a second. Every time you fill up, every single dollar you spend at the pump, somewhere between 15 cents and a quarter of every dollar is going out your exhaust pipe as unburned waste. You're funding something your car never used. You're paying for heat and pollution and nothing else. This isn't a conspiracy. This isn't a theory. This is in the engineering literature. It's in the EPA data. It's in the technical spec sheets of fuel injector manufacturers. It's just not something that gets translated into plain language and handed to the person standing at the pump. Because if it were, you'd immediately ask a very obvious question. Can that be fixed? The answer is yes. And it comes back to what that chemist discovered in the 1930s. Surface tension. You know what surface tension is. It's why water beads up on a waxed car hood. It's why insects can walk on water. It's the molecular force that holds the surface of a liquid together, that resists breaking apart. When fuel is forced through a fuel injector nozzle, it has to overcome its own surface tension to break into droplets. And the higher that surface tension is, the larger the droplets tend to form. Large droplets, as we just established, don't vaporize completely. They don't burn completely. They become waste. Now imagine you could lower that surface tension, chemically. Fundamentally change the way the fuel molecules interact at the surface. Make the liquid more willing, almost eager, to break into smaller, finer pieces when it's sprayed. The droplets get smaller, dramatically smaller. The total surface area of the fuel mist, the area exposed to air, exposed to heat, available for vaporization, increases by a factor that's hard to visualize. We're talking about orders of magnitude more surface area from the same volume of fuel. More surface area means faster, more complete vaporization. More vaporization means more of the fuel actually ignites. More ignition means more energy extracted from the same tank of gas. The math writes itself. This is not magic. This is not pseudoscience. This is surface chemistry, one of the most well-documented, well-understood branches of physical chemistry in existence. We use it to make detergents clean better. We use it to make pesticides spread more evenly on crops. We use it to make industrial lubricants work more efficiently. We use it in medicine, in manufacturing, in food production. The specific class of compounds that do this are called surfactants, surface active agents. Molecules that have one end that bonds with the liquid they're in and another end that repels it, sitting at the surface, disrupting the tension, changing the behavior of the entire liquid from the outside in. What the chemist discovered and what those wartime engineers verified was that certain surfactants are chemically compatible with hydrocarbon fuels. They mix without causing harm to the fuel's combustion properties. They don't add water. They don't introduce contaminants. They simply change the physical behavior of the fuel when it's atomized. And the results, when you run the numbers on improved atomization and combustion completeness, land somewhere in a range that sounds almost too good. But the physics supports it. And the physics doesn't care whether it's inconvenient for a trillion-dollar industry. Let me paint you a picture of that industry for a moment, because the economics here matter. The global oil and fuel market processes somewhere around 100 million barrels of crude oil every single day. The retail fuel market, just the gasoline and diesel that goes into passenger vehicles and commercial transport, represents hundreds of billions of dollars in annual revenue. Just in the United States alone, Americans spend somewhere in the range of $400 to $500 billion on fuel every year, depending on prices. Now, imagine that fuel efficiency improves, not industry-wide, not through some mandated fleet average, but genuinely at the individual engine level through chemistry. What happens? If the average driver uses 10% less fuel to travel the same distance, that's tens of billions of dollars that stop flowing to the pump. If the number approaches 20%, 25 or 30%, you're looking at a structural shock to an industry that's built its entire infrastructure, its pipelines, its refineries, its tanker fleets, its retail networks, around a certain volume of consumption. The incentive to not solve this problem is enormous. Not because there's a room full of executives in a dark boardroom twirling their mustaches. It's simpler than that, and more insidious. It's just economics. It's the quiet, persistent pressure of a market that rewards keeping things the way they are. Research doesn't get funded. Papers don't get picked up. Engineers who push in this direction find their proposals go nowhere. Not because someone actively stops them, but because no one with money to invest wants to open that particular door. You don't have to believe in grand conspiracies to understand how an idea gets buried. You just have to understand incentives. And the incentive here runs in one very clear direction. But before I show you what this tablet is made of, before I walk you through the mechanism and the process, I need to ask you something. If you've watched this far and some part of you is thinking, I want to know more. I want to see what else has been kept quiet like this. Hit the subscribe button right now. Because this channel is built on exactly this kind of excavation. Forgotten research, buried patents, the gap between what science knows and what industry tells us. Every week, there's another archive, another file that didn't make it into the mainstream conversation. And the next one is already being assembled. This video is one piece of a much larger picture, and you're going to want to be here for the rest of it. All right, let's talk about what actually goes into this tablet and how it works at the molecular level without getting lost in the kind of chemistry that would make your eyes glaze over. The surfactant family that works best with hydrocarbon fuels is a group of compounds most people have never heard of because they live in the professional and industrial world rather than the consumer one. Here's how to think about them simply. A surfactant molecule is like a tiny tool with two different ends. One end is attracted to oils, to hydrocarbons, to non-polar substances, the kind of chemistry that makes up fuel. The other end is repelled by those same substances. It wants to sit at the boundary, at the surface, pointing outward. When you dissolve a small amount of the right surfactant into a volume of fuel, those molecules migrate. They don't stay evenly mixed throughout the liquid. They move toward the surface. They accumulate at every droplet boundary, every interface between the fuel and the surrounding air. And in doing so, they weaken the cohesive force that holds the liquid surface together. The fuel becomes, in a measurable physical sense, more willing to break apart. When that fuel hits the injector nozzle and gets forced at high pressure into the intake manifold, it atomizes more completely. Where before you might have had a distribution of droplets ranging from very fine to quite coarse, now you have a distribution that skews dramatically toward the fine end. The coarse droplets, the ones that were your waste, largely disappear. And here's where the cascade effect matters. Smaller droplets don't just burn better because they vaporize more easily. They also burn more quickly, which means the combustion event is more complete before the piston begins its downstroke. You extract more energy at the peak of the pressure curve. The engine receives a fuller, more efficient push. Multiply that across every cylinder, every combustion cycle, every mile. You begin to understand why the numbers look the way they do. Now, some engines respond more dramatically than others. Older engines, particularly carbureted engines and diesel engines, tend to see the largest gains because their atomization is already less refined than modern direct injection gasoline engines. Port-injected engines sit in the middle. High-pressure direct injection systems in modern cars still see improvement, but it's more modest because they're already engineered for finer atomization than anything from 20 years ago. This is not a one-size-fits-all miracle. I want to be clear about that. If anyone tells you that any single intervention will produce identical results in every vehicle and every condition, they're selling you something. What this is, and what the chemistry and the physics support, is a meaningful, consistent, real improvement in the combustion efficiency of internal combustion engines that are operating below their theoretical optimum, which is almost all of them. Now let's talk about the physical form, the tablet itself. The tablet format matters. It's not an accident. Liquid additives have a problem. They can phase separate, degrade, or settle unevenly if not properly formulated and stored. A solid tablet, compressed and shaped to dissolve at a specific rate in fuel, delivers the surfactant chemistry more consistently. It enters the fuel slowly, reaching a relatively even concentration throughout the tank, rather than being a concentrated slug that hits the injectors unevenly. The base compounds used in the tablet formulation are, in their raw form, not exotic. They're derivatives of organic acids, combined with specific binding agents that give the tablet its physical structure and control its dissolution rate. The key compound, the surfactant itself, is the active ingredient. Everything else is just the delivery mechanism. The binder needs to be fuel compatible. It has to dissolve fully, leaving no residue that could clog injectors, foul oxygen sensors, or interfere with the catalytic converter. This is the part of the formulation that matters most from a safety and compatibility standpoint, and it's also the part that took the most refinement over the decades of work that went into this. Some of the early formulations, the wartime ones, the ones that came out of the research the chemists set in motion, used binders that were cruder, effective, but not clean burning. Modern versions, built on better understanding of combustion chemistry, use binders that leave no detectable residue in either the fuel system or the exhaust. The dissolution rate is calibrated so that one tablet, sized appropriately for a standard passenger vehicle fuel tank, treats the entire volume of a full tank. It dissolves within the first hour or so after you fill up, long before you've put any significant miles on that tank. You don't have to think about it after that. You fill up, you drop in a tablet, you drive. Now, I'm going to be deliberate about how much procedural detail I go into here, and I want to tell you why. The raw compounds involved in this formulation, in their concentrated, uncompressed form, need to be handled with care. They're not violently hazardous. They're not the kind of thing that explodes if you look at it wrong. But they are flammable in specific conditions. They can cause skin and eye irritation in concentrated form, and like any chemical you're introducing into a fuel system, there's a right way and a wrong way to handle them. What I'll tell you is the framework, the conceptual architecture. The active compound is sourced from industrial chemical suppliers, the kind of supplier that serves agricultural, cleaning products, and manufacturing sectors. It's not a controlled substance. This tiny tablet isn't magic. It's precision engineering in a simple form. Made using a cold press method, like cosmetic powders or pills, it's compressed just enough to stay solid, yet dissolve at the perfect rate in fuel. Every detail matters. The ratio of compounds, binder, pressure, and size. Change one, and everything shifts. It's a fully calibrated system. For those with a chemistry background, recreating it isn't difficult. For others, the smarter move is learning from niche automotive communities where this knowledge quietly exists. Here's where it gets interesting. The first tank? Sometimes no change, that's normal. The system is conditioning. But by the second or third fill-up, fuel economy starts improving. Most users report gains of 10% to 20%, sometimes more in older engines. That means fewer fill-ups and real savings, hundreds a year, even thousands over time, from something that costs about $1. There's also a hidden benefit. Cleaner combustion, less waste, fewer emissions, and a healthier engine that runs longer. Some users even report engines looking unusually clean after years of use. And it all comes down to how fuel behaves at a microscopic level. Now think, how much fuel have you used in your life? And how much of it never fully burned? That waste adds up, quietly, over time. And the solution? It's been around for decades. Buried, ignored, forgotten, until now.